All right, let's dive in. Today we're looking at ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations.
Yep.
It's well, a political and economic union of 10 different countries in Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
And we're going to really get into, what's going on there, what are some of the challenges and the potential, I guess, and the role of, the big players.
Mm.
The US and China. We're working with an analysis of this video about ASEAN, so are you ready to get started?
Yeah, I am. I'm really excited about this one. I think ASEAN is, it comes up a lot. It's talked about as having all this potential.
Yeah.
But this source really digs into the complexities,
Right.
which I think are really interesting.
It seems like just to get all of those nations on the same page must be a real, balancing act.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things that maybe aren't as obvious, beyond the usual stuff you hear about? What hurdles does ASEAN face?
Well, the source points out that even if, okay, say they get past the, the obvious things,
Yeah.
like political differences and economic disparities,
Right.
there's this underlying tension. It's between, national identity
Oh, okay.
and the need for regional solidarity.
Hmm.
So it's like each of these countries, they want to maintain their unique character,
Yeah. Yeah.
but they also need to work together for the greater good of ASEAN.
So yeah, how do you find that sweet spot?
Right. It's not easy.
Yeah.
And actually, the source suggests that the leadership or the lack of leadership could make or break this whole thing.
Really?
Yeah. And they actually point to one specific person. They don't name names, but they keep referring to this individual as quote-unquote Chinese,
Yeah.
who they think could be a unifying force for ASEAN.
So who is this Chinese? What makes them stand out as such a crucial player?
Well, like I said, they don't get into specifics
Uh,
about who they are or their title,
Yeah.
but they imply that this person they can bridge the divides and encourage collaboration between all these different nations. It seems like it's less about their nationality and more about their ability to bring people together, almost like a diplomatic architect.
So someone who can get everyone on the same page.
Yeah, exactly. Someone who can build a shared vision for Asia's future.
Wow. That's a big job.
It is.
Have there been any historical figures in the region who've been able to kind of do something like that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Think about someone like Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore.
Right.
He was instrumental in shaping not just the economic development of Singapore, but the national identity,
Yeah. Yeah.
the unity of Singapore.
Mm-hmm.
So his leadership style, might offer some insights into what Asia needs, right now.
Interesting. Okay, so you've got all these internal dynamics.
Right.
But then there's also, the influence of major players like the U.S., right?
Yeah.
That they're not exactly uninvolved.
Well, yeah. And the source points out this really interesting trend. They say that the U.S. involvement in Asia, it's actually been very consistent across different administrations, regardless of political leanings.
Really?
Yeah.
It seems like everything changes when a new president takes office,
But they're saying that there's this deeper strategic interest there
Okay.
that kind of transcends all of that.
So what does that mean for ASEAN then?
Well, they have this long-standing relationship with the U.S. to consider,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
It's this balancing act. They want to use that relationship to help them economically,
Sure.
but, politically. But they also want to maintain their own autonomy and not become too dependent on anyone.
That sounds tricky.
It is tricky. It is.
What do you think, listeners?
Yeah. How do you walk that line?
Yeah.
Actually, the source suggests that ASEAN's cultural richness could be a real asset here. They point specifically to the strong national identities of countries like Vietnam, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia.
Oh, that's interesting. So having those strong national identities, that can actually be helpful.
Well, yeah, it's fascinating, right?
Yeah.
Because it's both a source of strength and a potential challenge.
Right.
So how do you foster, unity when you've got all these different cultures?
Yeah.
Without erasing what makes each country unique?
Yeah, that's the question. How do you do that?
Well, the source argues that, cooperation and mutual respect are key.
Of course.
But they acknowledge that conflict is basically inevitable
Yeah.
in a region this diverse.
So, if it's inevitable, how do you, use it?
Right.
How do you turn it into something positive?
Right,
What
well.
strategies could they use to navigate those differences? Listeners, what do you think?
Yeah. What do you think? What are your initial thoughts on that? I'd love to hear them. But before we get too deep into the solutions,
Okay.
the source kind of throws a curveball.
Okay.
It's a surprising statistic about ASEAN's population.
Oh, here we go. This is where things get interesting.
Okay, so are you ready for this?
Yeah.
The source claims that 60 to 70% of ASEAN's population is over the age of 60.
Whoa. Really? That is way older than I would have guessed.
Right.
I was picturing a much younger, uh, you know, demographic.
Yeah.
What does that, I mean, what does that mean for their future?
Well, it affects everything. It impacts their workforce, their healthcare needs, their social programs,
Hmm.
yeah, even their cultural values.
Wow. That is a whole other layer to think about. How can they use that, though? I mean, how can I take advantage of all of that? The wisdom and experience of that generation.
It's definitely a challenge,
Yeah.
but it's also a huge opportunity.
Yeah.
It is.
It seems like we've only just scratched the surface here.
We have. We have. So welcome back. I hope you've had a chance to maybe think about some of those questions we left you with.
Yeah, definitely a lot to think about. I'm still really kind of hung up on this, you know, this tension between national identity
Right.
and regional solidarity.
It's a tough one.
Yeah.
And I think the source really hits on something when they say that finding that balance is really going to determine if ASEAN is successful.
Yeah.
Each nation needs to, they need to hold on to what makes them unique,
Right.
but they also have to see the benefits of working together.
It's like it's like a sports team, you know.
Yeah.
Every player has their strengths, right?
Right.
But they have to like work together to win.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Yeah.
They need to communicate well,
Yeah.
have shared goals, be willing to compromise.
But how do you build that kind of trust
Right.
when you're dealing with all these different histories, political systems,
Yeah.
rivalries?
Yeah. It's definitely not easy.
Mm.
But the source, they point to open dialogue,
Mm.
finding that common ground.
Okay.
They suggest that focusing on shared economic interests could be one way to start.
So like a win-win.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
But it's not just about the money.
Right.
They also talk about cultural exchange, like getting people to connect,
Okay.
to build relationships,
Mhm.
fostering understanding and appreciation.
Yeah, breaking down those stereotypes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they even suggest having more education initiatives
Mm.
and tourism, to get people to visit each other's countries.
So they can connect on a human level,
Right.
not just the politics.
Right.
Okay, well, we can't forget about that statistic
Right.
about the aging population.
Oh, yeah. Wow. That was a big one.
How do they deal with that? I mean, what do they do?
Well, the source talks about developing age-friendly policies and infrastructure.
Like what kind of stuff?
So things like, accessible transportation,
Uh.
healthcare that's specifically, designed for older folks,
Right.
and community programs to get them involved.
Right, so they're not just like isolated.
Right. But it's not just about caring for them,
Yeah.
It's also about valuing them
Oh, okay.
because they have so much to offer, like knowledge and experience.
So like mentorship programs.
Yeah,
Things-
things like that.
So they can pass that knowledge on.
Exactly. Think
Yeah.
about, all of those experienced entrepreneurs, skilled craftspeople,
Yeah.
community leaders. They're like a huge resource for ASEAN.
It kind of changes how you think about it, you know?
Yeah.
It's not a burden.
Right.
It's an asset
It is.
if you use it the right way.
It is. And it goes back to that idea of regional solidarity.
Hmm.
If you want a strong ASEAN,
Mhm.
you have to make sure everyone feels valued.
Mhm.
Everyone has the opportunity to contribute.
That's really powerful. And it makes me think about leadership. Who's going to, lead the charge on this?
It is a critical question. And the source doesn't get into specifics
Yeah.
about who those leaders will be
Okay.
or how they'll go about doing it.
Right.
But they definitely imply that strong leadership
Yeah.
will be essential to deal with all of these challenges.
So what do you think those leaders are going to need to be successful?
Well, first off, they're going to have to be good at balancing competing interests,
Right.
getting people to agree.
A lot of compromise.
Yeah. But also, they have to inspire people
Yeah.
from all these different backgrounds to work together.
That's a tall order.
It is.
But, I think those qualities aren't just for politicians.
Right.
It applies to like all of us.
Absolutely. In our jobs, our families,
Yeah.
in our communities.
So, yeah, it brings us back to this idea that that we all have a role to play
We do.
in shaping the future of ASEAN.
It's not about waiting for someone else to fix it.
Right.
It's about taking ownership in our own little corner of the world.
Okay, so we can't forget about the U.S.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. The big elephant in the room.
I mean, all that talk about the consistent involvement, what does that mean for ASEAN?
Well, they say it creates both opportunities
Okay.
and challenges.
I'm curious about that. Like,
Ah.
what are the good things? What are the bad things?
Well, the U.S. is a powerful economic partner,
Right.
right?
Sure.
They can help with investments, trade.
Yeah.
They can also help to stabilize the region, like deter conflict.
Right.
But they could become too reliant on the U.S.
Oh, okay.
economically and politically.
Exactly. And then they're not really making their own decisions.
Mm.
They're not, they're not in control.
Yeah, that goes back to what we were talking
Right.
about ASEAN having their own goals.
Exactly. And being clear about those goals when they're dealing with the U.S. Yeah. It's a reminder that, ASEAN's future isn't just decided by them.
Right.
There are outside forces at play. So, yeah, it's finding that balance
It is.
between taking advantage of the opportunities,
Yeah,
but not becoming, like, a pawn.
exactly.
It's inspiring to think about all the potential there.
It is.
But it seems like there's a lot to be careful about.
Yeah, it's a lot to navigate.
I'm sure our listeners are feeling the same way.
Oh, sure.
And as we head into the final part of this episode,
Very good.
I want to talk about what we as individuals can do
Yes.
to contribute to, a better Southeast Asia.
Me too. I think that's a perfect way to wrap up.
Right.
Let's move beyond just talking about the problems.
Yeah.
Let's talk about solutions.
So we've talked about a lot, like those internal challenges with national identity, and then the influence of, these global players like the U.S.
Yeah, a lot to think about.
It's a lot. As we wrap up, though, I keep coming back to this question, like, what can we actually do?
Right.
What can we do to help create a better, more successful ASEAN?
Yeah. It's easy to feel kind of helpless when you're looking at these big, complex issues.
Yeah.
But I think our source actually offers some clues about where to start, even in our own daily lives.
Okay.
They talk about the importance of cultural understanding and respect.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's something we can all do right now.
Yeah, totally. Just learning more about different ASEAN countries through books, movies, music,
Yeah,
even food, and
exactly.
connecting with people from those cultures.
Yeah.
Online in our communities.
Yeah. I mean, it's about pushing ourselves to see things from a different perspective.
Exactly. It's not just about passively, consuming stuff.
Right.
It's about actually talking to people.
Right.
Listening to them.
Yeah. And being open to learning from them.
Yeah. Okay, so what about that statistic we talked about?
All right.
The aging population.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, what can we do to create a more age-inclusive society?
Well, I think it starts with,
Yeah.
with ourselves, challenging our own assumptions about what it means to get older,
Right.
and recognizing all the things older people contribute.
Instead of seeing them as, irrelevant.
Exactly. And I think we need to actually make an effort, to include them.
Yeah.
So maybe that means volunteering at a senior center,
Yeah.
mentoring someone younger,
Yeah.
even just having conversations with the older people in our lives.
It all adds up. Right.
It does, yeah. It helps to create a more respectful, inclusive society.
Okay. What about conflict resolution? I mean, it feels like the world's getting more and more divided.
It really does.
And ASEAN is no exception. Like, is there anything we can do to, I don't know, encourage people to talk to each other?
Well, the source, they said that conflict is inevitable,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have to be bad.
Right.
We can, when we disagree with someone, we can be curious about their viewpoint
Yeah.
instead of just getting angry.
Oh, okay. So try to understand instead of just, yelling.
Right. We have to listen to each other, be willing to compromise.
And remember that we're all in this together.
Exactly.
Even if we don't always agree on how to get there. And those are important skills. I mean, not just for international stuff,
Right.
but in our own lives.
Absolutely. In our relationships, in our families.
And speaking of skills, remember we talked about leadership in Saran?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And how important it's going to be to have good leaders.
Yeah.
But, thinking about it now, I think that being a leader isn't just about having a fancy title. It's about, setting an example for other people.
Yeah.
And taking action, even when it's hard.
Yeah. And I think we can all do that. in our own way.
Like being a leader at work
Yeah,
or in our community.
right. It's about stepping up and saying, hey, like, I'm going to make a difference here.
So it's not about waiting for someone else to fix things.
Yeah.
It's about taking responsibility.
Exactly.
So I guess as we wrap up this deep dive into ASEAN, okay,
The takeaway is we all have a part to play
we do. We really do.
in making it a more unified, prosperous, and peaceful place.
Right. It starts with us.
Well, this has been an amazing conversation. I've learned so much.
Me too. It's such a fascinating region.
Yeah, it is. I hope our listeners are feeling inspired to, keep learning about ASEAN and maybe even find ways to get involved.
Me too.
It's been a pleasure exploring all of this with you.
Likewise.
And to all of our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.